Welcome to the podcast, everyone. My guest today is Cyrus Foote. So, Cyrus is somebody that I met through a men's group that I get together with every single Monday. And it's a space where you have men from all over the world, different backgrounds, different races. Some people are married with kids, others are single and just out of college, they have grandkids. And, everybody really just shows up authentically, vulnerably, honestly. They're able to be seen, be heard, just be able to talk through what they're going through right now. And Cyrus was somebody that really stood out to me in that group, partially because of his background. So he actually currently lives in New Zealand, and he's living on a boat. And when I asked him about it, because at first I was like, it's kind of strange, this guy's living on a boat. And then I find out that he's actually a captain of that boat. So this is a big yacht, and he's actually been doing this for years, in fact, a couple of decades. And he actually owns some property down in Costa Rica as well. So there was a few commonalities where I was like, hey, do you want to have a conversation? And we just hopped on a Zoom call. And I found out that, Cyrus really has a passion for sustainability. He has a passion for the current state of the world that we're in and climate change and all of these different things. And we didn't even honestly get a chance to talk deeply about that the first time we talked, but I knew immediately that I wanted to have a conversation with him on the podcast because these are things that, consciously I was aware of the climate change and of, different documentaries like Seaspiracy and that type of thing that just speaks to the gravity of the challenges that we're facing as a society and in the world today. And I knew that Cyrus would have a lot to contribute to this conversation. And of course, a vision of his and what he's really motivated by is driven around these topics. So, we dove deep into that conversation, and he gave his perspective of being somebody that's been on the sea, on the ocean, and actually seeing what's going on. And he spoke about what he's doing to create change and what he's doing to create awareness and that ripple effect that ultimately creates the transformation that everybody ultimately wants. Because, we have to take care of this world. And if we don't, then it will never exist in the way that it does now. So I think this is an important conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it. So let's go ahead and give it a listen. Cyrus, good to see you, man. It's great to chat with you again here. Obviously, we don't spend a ton of time together, but I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, you bet. I would have given a little bit of context in the introduction leading into this as to who you are and how we connected, but we haven't known each other for that long, only a few months since I joined the Mentorship Mondays with Nick and Di. And, I've alluded to the fact that I met a bunch of really great people in that group. And, maybe we'll kind of riff on that really quickly here just to give everybody some context. But, sometimes you meet people and you feel like you've known them forever, or like you could easily sit down and spend a weekend and just hang out and talk about stuff. And I kind of felt that way with you and actually everybody in that group, to be quite honest. But it's pretty amazing, the community and the space that's been created with that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great group. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I know I've mentioned it before in some of the chats that we've had in that group, but it just really feels so much like a campfire to me. Kind of just sitting around the campfire, talking with your brothers about just the things that are coming up, and a lot of the things that maybe don't come up in everyday life. But when you have a space where it's kind of just men and just men being real and authentic, like some things come up, and it's nice to have the space for that to kind of exist in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's never more obvious than now too, obviously with lockdowns and COVID restrictions and everything else. But we were kind of joking around before we flipped the switch on this. I said, we were having some audio issues, and I said, yeah, it kind of sounded like you're in a boat and kind of tucked into a closet. And you're like, well, actually, I kind of am. Cyrus is actually living on a boat, right? And you're in New Zealand, I understand?
I am. I'm on a boat. This is a boat here behind me. This is all teak. I'm on a 70-foot sailboat here in Auckland, New Zealand. And we sailed in here, sailed across the Pacific and sailed into New Zealand in October of 2019. And that was just a few months before the pandemic started. And so we came in to do some work, and we are meant to continue sailing. This is a global sailing program. and we've been here ever since. So it's almost 2 years now that we've been
Wow.
sitting here, and we've done a lot of work since we've been here. We took advantage of the time to do some work to the boat because they have good facilities here. But for the large part, it was a break in what was a global program, and so we haven't been doing much sailing at all. Just some test sailing around the coast.
Yeah, so it's even more polarizing for you, right? Where you're literally, I'm sure you're around other people, but to be taken from this space, and I think it's just an important thing to address the fact that, when COVID hits, everybody, hunkered down and you were told to stay home. And then there's been varying levels of lockdown. And I know New Zealand in particular has been very, very like they closed the borders, didn't they? Didn't let anybody
Yeah,
in. And they've had
yeah.
very low case counts, I think, as a result, haven't they? But how has it been being there and being on the boats? Like, do you get out into the community? I think you mentioned that like you literally couldn't leave because you wouldn't be able to come back. Isn't that what you told me last time?
Yeah, like as far as me, my immigration status as a foreigner, since they're only allowing Kiwis back into the country, and they still are only allowing Kiwis back into the country. If I were to choose to leave for whatever reason, if I wanted to fly home, or if God forbid I had a friend or family member that got sick from COVID, I obviously would try to go visit them and be with them, and that would be
Hmm.
a one-way ticket. If I were to leave New Zealand at any time in the last 2 years, like I wouldn't have been able to come back to this work that I'm doing here with this boat. So
Right.
so that was kind of like I've been stuck here in that essence. Like if I wanted to keep this job and keep this program moving as the captain, then I would have to stay here. And so I've been here, yeah, throughout the pandemic, and it's been a blessing. Enjoyed being in New Zealand. It's been a bit of a lifeboat from the pandemic. We haven't really had, as you said, we've had very low case counts here. They closed the borders and immediately kind of just went into a high level lockdown. And it's a very compliant population here, and they were all happy to kind of like they call it the team of 5 million. There's only 5 million people in the country, and everybody kind of did what the government asked them to do and stayed home and took all the measures that we needed to take in lockdown, and they stamped out the virus and they kept the borders closed. And so we got to live without COVID for a year, this whole last year. These last 12 months, we were living without COVID while the rest of the world was going through lockdowns, rolling lockdowns, pandemic, all kinds of problems that were associated with the COVID reality. And we got to go to music festivals, and we got to go
Oh,
to
wow.
live music events, and we didn't have to have any of these other restrictions. So it was really nice to be here to be a part of that, but it also required, as you say, these sacrifices. Like I couldn't leave and come back, and also to get to that point, these lockdowns that they did here were quite intense. It was in your house for 23 hours out of the day. You could leave and go do exercising or go to the supermarket or the pharmacy, but it's other than that, it's just a post-apocalyptic kind of ghost town. Yeah.
It's very interesting. And, I want to get into your background and ultimately like what led you to there where you are right now. And I think to just set a little context too, and I know we spoke about this a little bit before, but there's a quote by Brene Brown where she says, "One day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will be somebody else's survival guide." So I'll use that to kind of set the context here to just create the space to say, I'd love to hear your background story of kind of like what led you to this, because you're doing a very unique thing, number one, right? And then number two and number three is you and I have talked about Costa Rica because I remember I brought it up, or maybe Stefan did on one of our calls like months ago. And he said, "Hey guys, if you ever have any questions about Costa Rica, just let me know. I got a place there." And I was like, okay, I got to talk to this guy because like you need the like insider understanding of what's going on. And then the other piece, of course, is just our last conversation dove into just this whole idea of like climate change and sustainability, and it really kind of cracked the nut open for me. And we were like right at the end of our call because my kids were climbing all over me. But that's what led to this conversation was like, we should just do a podcast and talk about that. So I want to dive into all those pieces because I don't think people are born thinking about climate change and sustainability. Something obviously in your lifetime has led you to being passionate about this thing. So do you want to maybe back things up for people and just let them know like a little bit of your journey along the way here and kind of like what led you to being in this boat here? And then we'll let it lead us down the path of talking about that stuff.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can start with my mother is a sailor. And so she's the
Okay.
one that got me into sailing. And I did my first ocean passage when I was 3 years old, sailed from with her from the Caribbean all the way up the eastern seaboard to Boston. And so
Wow.
that was my introduction to ocean sailing at a really young age. And it basically planted the seed in my being to continue to want to go out and adventure and explore the world through that medium, through sailing. And so I went back and I went to school, and back in the States. And my parents were separated when I was 5, so my mother was the gypsy sailor, and I'd go and spend time with her on sailboats. And my father was more of a homebody, and he lived in Massachusetts. And so I kind of got the best of both worlds. I had stability on one side and the adventure on the other. And so I went back to live with my dad, and I lived in Massachusetts, and had that upbringing there. But then when I was old enough to leave home, I went and wanted to adventure on sailboats. And at first, I was like, "Well, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to make enough money so I could buy my own sailboat." And I realized that sailboats are quite expensive, and it was going to take me quite a while to
Yeah.
save up to buy my own. I mean, I might be in my 30s or 40s by the time I was actually able to buy my own sailboat and then retire or sail around the world then. And I was young at this point. I was in my late teens, and I was ready for adventuring at that point. So I decided to go the route of becoming a captain and sailing other people's sailboats around. And so I did
Hmm.
that when I moved to Hawaii when I was in 20 years old. I moved to Hawaii, and I started sailing there, and I started working in outdoor education and sailing sailboats around the Hawaiian Islands. And then from the outdoor education, I got into working with data collection with scientists, mostly with cetaceans, humpback whales, and some dolphin research. And then that led into more experience as a captain and a waterman living in Hawaii. I was surfing and diving and kayaking, and then that led into working on an actual expedition boat. So I became the first mate on an expedition boat that was sailing around the world, and that was in 2003. And I was with that expedition for 5 years, almost 5 years. It was the Sorcerer 2 expedition. It was a 100-foot sailboat, and we were tasked with sailing around the world collecting ocean water and looking at the microbes. And specifically, we were working on grants from the well, we were working on grants from several grants, but most of what we were looking for was alternative energy in the form of like biology, in the form of microbes. And so that brought us all over the world. That was a 4.5 year expedition, and through that work, we are able to work with all different kinds of scientists and universities and research institutes and climatologists and microbiologists and marine biologists and oceanographers. And it was through that experience of working with those people that were collecting all that data that we really started to get a broad and solid picture as to how much we were destroying the environment. Because
Hmm.
every scientist that we came across that was studying the environment, some aspect of the environment, was looking at factors that were in decline. So and it was all from human activity. It was all from pollution or some form of human activity that was causing all these ecosystems to be in decline. And so that really offered.
And what year was this again?
This was between 2003 and 2007. Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. So yeah, like 20, almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is the time when Al Gore was doing his first world tour,
That's
and
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, he was talking about climate change at that time, and he was talking about the data that these scientists were collecting, but nobody was really listening then. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say nobody, but I wouldn't say that it really made the impact that we were all expecting that it would. The people that were working in these environments, in these ecosystems, that were watching this collapse happening. And then we said, wow, here's an emissary, here's somebody that's traveling the world, here's the vice president or former vice president that's traveling the world, and he's talking about this stuff. This is what's really going to make the change. This is what's gonna wake the world up to what's happening. And it didn't. It
And it
didn't.
didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it did to a certain extent, but then there was all this doubt that got brought in about whether or not it was real, and there was the
Mm.
3% of scientists that said that it, that were saying that it wasn't real, as opposed to the 97 that were, and that caused enough doubt. And there was a huge misinformation campaign that was launched by the petrol fuel companies, and
Yeah.
it was yeah, it never materialized the way that we thought it would.
And history repeats itself over and over again, right? It's like you're seeing all of that nowadays, even too, with a number of different issues. But anyways, yeah, continue on. So you're doing this stuff. You're seeing the research. It's obviously it must have had an impact on you back then. What was the feeling for you as you saw this awareness being built, but then nobody really doing anything about it?
Yeah, I mean it's frustrating. It's sad. I mean you go through your own processes of realizing that we're going down a path as a species that's like that's not sustainable. We're going off a cliff. And so when you really start to see that, it's you go through your own mourning process, and then once you get through that, you come out on the other side of that, and you're like, okay, well, we can either continue to just kind of throw our hands up in the air and just say there's nothing that we can do about this and just kind of submit to this catastrophe, or we work towards trying to find solutions. And unless you want to be depressed for the rest of your life, then that's what you end up falling into. Is you fall into like, okay, what are the solutions? Like, what can we do about this? And then that pushes you into sustainability and what we now call regeneration, because sustainability was kind of it has been the buzzword for a number of years, but really sustaining is like, if you're going to cook in a kitchen and it's already dirty and you want to keep on cooking, you're just saying sustaining is just saying like, oh, we're just going to leave the kitchen dirty and just keep cooking on the dirtiness that's in this kitchen. Regeneration is going into the kitchen and saying, okay, well, we want to keep cooking in this kitchen, but we're also going to be cleaning it as we go. So that's really where we need to be headed, is into regeneration. And a lot of what we call sustainability right now is moving into regenerative properties and projects. So it's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the future. That's where we're headed.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that. And I kind of knew that our conversation might bounce around a bunch of different places, but I know I watched, and I mentioned this to you, I watched a Netflix show and I was trying to remember what it was called. I just Googled it again, but Breaking Boundaries. And they actually use really great visuals talking about this threshold, or this like line that we are pushing towards crossing. And then we crossed it. And now we're in this yellow danger zone. And then the scientists are saying that, like, it's literally like another decade before there's irreversible impact on the world. And the first thing that comes to mind in you saying this is like, I totally forgot about the Al Gore stuff and the fact that his documentary came out 20 years ago. And it just brought up the thought, like the analogy that I'm thinking of is like, I enjoy a good hamburger, but if you threw me on the kill floor and I saw where it actually came from, I might be a little disturbed. But then the other side that comes up though is like, but would I actually change my actions? And I think that's the question that we're presenting here, really a little bit, is like, it's one thing to kind of see it. And for you being on the ocean, you've seen it, you've actually seen this impact. You've seen the science. I'm interested to know, actually, have you seen these like garbage patches? I think last time we talked about Costa Rica, you're saying like you're a surfer, right? And I think you talked a little bit about the water even too, and how you've seen changes in it over time.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I have sailed through the South Pacific trash gyre. Yeah, there's one in both the Atlantic and the Pacific.
Yeah.
More than one actually, but there's the big one that everybody talks about is in the South Pacific, and we have sailed through it. It's disheartening. I mean, it really is. It's like, when you're out in the ocean, in the middle of the ocean, and you're on this giant blue disc. I mean, you look around you, 360 degrees is just horizon. It's as far
Yeah.
as you can see to the horizon, and when you're going through that Pacific trash gyre, it is like trash and plastic floating everywhere. It's to the horizon in all directions, and
Wow.
for days. I mean, you go to sleep and it's, trash is kind of like bouncing off the hull, and you wake up and you spend 12 hours sailing through it, and it's bouncing off the hull, and you go to sleep and you wake up and you go to sleep and you wake up, and it's like that for days. So I mean, it is there, and it's real, and it's just, a visual manifestation of how out of alignment we are with
Mm.
how we're utilizing the resources on the planet in
Yeah.
unsustainable ways. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I can just only picture it in my mind. I just can't imagine what it would be like to experience that or see it. And I know we were referencing this a little bit before we hopped on here too, but I did another interview earlier today where we were talking about impact, like from an individual level. Like you see something like that and then you think, well, is me not throwing my straws in the garbage or, using recyclable packages and stuff really going to make a difference? And of course, it's a compounding effect, right? But it's interesting you say the regeneration. So, do you want to maybe dig into that a little bit and just kind of define what that means exactly? Because I'm hoping that maybe goes down a whole nother rabbit hole here. Because I'm just interested in understanding what you mean by the regeneration side of things.
Well, I mean, first of all, to answer your question, yes, it does make a difference. Is that all that we need to do? No, it's not. So it's like we need to be making these choices on an individual basis, which I think all of us are kind of, willing to do. But it is also changing our culture. It's about shifting towards policy on community levels, like whether it's your town or your small community within your town, or if it's your state or your nation, or even as a global community. We need to be switching our policy to be more in alignment with sustainability. Basically, not pulling resources out of our earth and out of our planet at an unsustainable rate, and also not polluting at an unsustainable rate. The earth is resilient. She can absorb a lot of what we're doing, but only to a certain extent. So we need to come back more into a sustainable relationship with that. And that means that we need to adopt policy on community wide, nationwide, and global sizing. So that's where we need to be. We need to be, what is it? It's think local but act globally. Is that or
Mm.
no? It's act local, think global.
Yeah.
So this is what we need to be doing. We need to be like acting in our local sphere where we have our influence, but thinking about the broader global sphere.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thought process with that too, because obviously the COVID situation and the lockdowns and everything just polarized and like amplified everything, around, the impact of one person and, just how important relationships are or travel or all of these things. And, when you tie them all together and you think, like, I haven't been to Costa Rica yet, and I know you have a place there and it's got a special place in your heart, even too. But
Yeah.
I'm sure the Costa Rica that I'm going to is very different than the one that you first experienced when you went there, too. And specifically around this kind of thing, right? Like, even just garbage floating in the ocean when you're out surfing and stuff. Like, how long ago were you in Costa Rica for the very first time? And what have you seen change in that environment?
Oh, in Costa Rica? Yeah, Costa Rica is
Yeah.
changing a lot. Yeah, yeah. I was the first time I went to Costa Rica was probably about 15 years ago, and it was just a few years after that I bought property there and built a home, and I've been sailing ever since. So I say I built a home, but I've only been really able to go back and visit for 2 or 3 months out of the year at the most, and
Yep.
hoping to get there more often in the future. But I've seen it change a lot. There's been a lot of North Americans, a lot of Californians that have moved down there. It's a safe country. There's no military. It's safe to invest in, and there's a lot of ecotourism, and a good portion of the Costa Rican GDP actually comes from ecotourism, which means that a lot of the money that they're making comes from looking after and taking care of the environment, which is a really important national equation.
Yeah, and this is that ripple effect, I guess, that I'm seeing and kind of alluding to is that Costa Rica has a major reliance on that outside money coming in the form of investment and travelers and that type of thing, and then something like COVID hits and it just comes to a screeching halt, and then now there's different policies that in play or just different restrictions that make it more challenging for people to travel, and it seems like it was just this like culminating event that just exploded all of a sudden. And I wonder on the like sustainability and just the climate change kind of things, like what needs to happen to create the wake up call, you know? Because you said like it's Al Gore has this documentary. I've just mentioned the Breaking Boundaries one. Like that one literally like disturbed me. And then Seaspiracy, same thing. I watched that one. And again, I'm sure from your seat of your experience and stuff, you're probably looking at it and like, yeah, that's scratching the surface. It's probably enough to scare some people, but will it actually create change? Like, I'm assuming you've seen those documentaries, hey, the Netflix specials and whatnot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. I've seen them, and a lot of the information, because of my experience and what I've been able to be a part of, I already knew a lot of that.
Yeah,
But that was my personal experience. It was really good to see that on a big platform like Netflix, and to have people talking about it and saying like, "Wow, I saw that documentary, and it was like really enlightening for me." And it's good to see that on popular platforms that's getting coverage. It's important. And to
yeah.
answer your question, I think the equation that we're working with is that we tend to want to protect that which we appreciate, right? And
Mm,
so I think that like you were talking about you liking burgers, and you're not really sure how much it would affect you if you went and saw a factory farm or what it is, wherever the
yeah.
meat's coming from. And like if you came to maybe appreciate and love cows more, then maybe that would make a difference as to how often you wanted to eat them. Like
Yeah, right.
so I think that's the equation that we're working with, is like we protect what we love and appreciate. And so
Yeah.
how do we create that awareness about like, or it environmentalism and sustainability, it's a twofold equation. It's about creating awareness around the solutions that we have available to us, and also it's about fueling the fire of appreciation,
Mm,
inspiring people to be appreciative of the world that we live in. And it's just about the diversity of the world that we live in, and wanting to save that, wanting to save that for themselves and for future generations. And you mentioned before, you mentioned a couple of times that documentary, which is a really good one, Breaking Boundaries. and
hmm.
and the big focus on that documentary is, as you mentioned, it's talking about these tipping points, and about how we're reaching, and in some cases surpassing, these tipping points in a very short period of time, just in one generation. And it's an awesome opportunity, because what we're looking at right now is that the people that are alive on the planet today, they're the ones that are going to be deciding, because we can or cannot pass these tipping points. They're the ones that are going to be deciding what kind of planet we might be looking at for the next 10 generations or 100 generations. So it's like a huge responsibility. Like no other generation in the history of our species has had that responsibility, and yet here we are. And that's what's so amazing about being alive right now, is that these choices that we make over the next decade or 2 decades, whether we are able to stay within these boundaries, is gonna affect the planet for thousands of years. It's gonna affect the diversity and the world that we live in as humans. And the planet will survive. The planet will go through her cycles, right?
Yeah.
What we're talking about is what our experience is going to be like, what our kids' experience is going to be like. Are they going to live in a rich, diverse world, or are they going to live in a world that's like in decline, where there's not as much diversity, where there's mass species extinctions, where there's dead coral reefs, and a lot of problems with drought and climate change and topsoil erosion and melting polar ice caps. I mean, all these things they're not just happening at some point in the distant future. They're happening now, and we still have an opportunity within these coming years to put the brakes on it, and to make sure that the damage that is being done is mitigated, and that we can go back to. We're still on the edge of being able to go back to a really rich, healthy, and happy, diverse planet. But if we wait another 20, 30, 40 years, and it's even another 10 years in some cases, it depends on which tipping points you're looking at, then it's going to be too late. And it'll affect thousands of years of life on the planet. So it's an amazing opportunity to be alive, that we can be the ones that are making these decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And There's a quote that comes to mind, actually. I think it's Dr. Joe Dispenza that talks about transformation of yourself, like forget about transformation of the world and the climate change and everything else. But even just on an individual level, we can choose to do it in a state of happiness and abundance and that type of thing, or we can choose to do it in a state of fear and inflammation. And, like the most obvious example is our health, right? Like you can choose to make good choices on taking care of yourself, eating good, exercising when you're in a good state, or you can do it when you get cancer. And now you're already at that point where just getting back to regenerating, your being as being healthy again is just so much more difficult. And I think that at least allows me to kind of wrap my head around the significance of what we're talking about here, especially when I think about my kids, right? Because when I think about my kids and their future, naturally as a dad, it's important. And that's why I really wanted to have this conversation, because even if we can be one piece of awareness or a ripple effect that, gets people talking about this in a different way and taking small actions, it can have a huge impact ultimately. And I know you've got a few things on the go even now as you're, working in the environment that you are right now on the boats and doing that kind of thing. And you forwarded over a few things to me. I believe you referenced it as the street. Do you want to maybe speak about that and what the inspiration was behind it and just give a little context to everybody? Because it kind of speaks to that little, micro change in a community that then can lead to a bigger global impact.
You know, just to start with that, in business, they talk about, or we talk about the crystal ball, right? We talk about being able to look into the future and say, okay, well, where is society going? Where is our culture going? And when we arrive at a new destination and we reach out for a product or a service as a business, if you try to look into that crystal ball and see what that might be, you try to set up your shop or your product so that when culture arrives there and society arrives at that point and reaches out, you're like, here we go, I have the service and I have the product available. That's what Steve Jobs was so good at. He was so good at looking into the crystal ball and saying, well, this is where we're headed and this is what we're going to all be reaching for. And then he created his products to fit into that market. And that's what created modern day Apple, was visionaries like Steve Jobs and others. So this project, The Street, it's about looking at where we're going, and trying to fill the service of educating on sustainability and creating excitement around the solutions that are available, and creating appreciation around diversity in nature, and also as us as a part of nature, human beings, like the diversity of humans as well. So the motto for this program is celebrate diversity, and it's meant to encompass all of diversity that we're celebrating. And so it's a project that is basically celebrating cross-cultural education and cross-cultural appreciation, while at the same time offering solutions for helping to protect the environment and culture, so that we can all move forward in a way that we're appreciating each other and offering each other solutions for protecting our planet and our world, and not fighting with each other and creating more fear and separation. So this is a project it's meant to be self-perpetuating. So we identified it when we started talking about, okay, well, if we're trying to create cross-cultural appreciation, like how do we do that? How do we go out into the world and select these motivating factors that allow us to appreciate each other? And we realized when we started looking at this that in every city on the planet, it's already happening. There's already cross-cultural appreciation happening, and it's happening through food. Like we've all had we've all had Chinese food or Mexican food or some other cultural food, right?
Speaking of burgers,
right, right. So it's already happening. We're already appreciating each other in this way, and so we're using that as like a doorway to kind of say, okay, well, if you're appreciating food from another culture, then like maybe we can also be appreciating other aspects of that culture. So it's about utilizing the food as a doorway, and so that's why we call this project The Street, because we're serving at this location within the realms of this offering is street food. So it's street food from all over the world, from different cultures. But it doesn't stop there. What we're also offering is a venue site as well. So we're meant to be showing these documentaries that you talk about, that are inspiring you to learn more and appreciate more about the planet, appreciate more about environment or each other. We would offer a space for this as well, like a venue space that would be available to the public, so they could come and they could try out different foods from different cultures, and then as well they could maybe watch a documentary on what's happening in that particular area of the world or in their own community. And then it's also a venue site that would be offered for people that are interested in giving education, speaking, TED Talk type
Yep.
experiences. So it's kind of answering all that at once. So yeah, it's a project, and the whole thing is housed in a what we call an upcycled building. It's made out of shipping containers, and everything in this location is all upcycled materials. So it's enhancing this idea of the reduce, reuse, recycle, and inspiring different ways that we could be doing this. So it's kind of like we're calling it like a sustainability hub and cultural center.
Yeah.
And this is, we're trying to build this, and we're hoping to build it in one city and then in another and another. And the more cities that we put it in, the more educated we can be about the solutions that we need to celebrate diversity and to help protect it.
I find it interesting too because being in Canada, it's actually quite a diverse population here. Like, there's a lot of immigrants in Canada. There's a lot of, well, Canada was founded by immigrants, but this is going to go down seven different paths here. So let me see if I
Yeah,
can
let's
spit
go.
it out. But like, so people are a little bit more restricted to staying at home. People aren't traveling as much. People are missing it naturally. What do they miss about traveling? Well, they miss the experience of being in a new culture. They miss the experience of being surrounded by different people, eating different foods, naturally seeing different places and that type of thing, right? But
Yeah.
I think what you're alluding to here is like creating a space. Like, I can imagine this in Vancouver. Like, there's literally, it's a melting pot of people and foods and culture, and it could be, a collection place for people to come together that maybe aren't either capable of or just not wanting to travel in the way that we used to, but still being able to have that experience closer to home and actually get educated along the way so that they can see the impact of what they do in their backyard and how it actually impacts the rest of the world. That's where my brain went with all of this. Did any of that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the new reality that we're living in, is that we have so
Right.
much of this information that's available to us at our fingertips through these screens and through other means of media. Like, it's we don't have to do as much traveling as we used to. Um,
Hmm.
but I mean, traveling, it opens you up to new ideas and new cultures. I mean, that's when we are the most open to other cultures outside of the one that we grew up in or the one that we're familiar with. Is when we go out and we cross the border and we go somewhere new. That's when
Yeah.
we're interested in it. It's not something that's like, oh, it's that thing and it's separate and it's weird and it's different from me. It's you go there and you're like, wow, this is different and this is cool. I like that it's different. This is interesting. Like, let's go deeper.
Hmm.
Let's go travel. Let's go explore. Let's go into the mountains. Let's go into the marketplaces, and let's go see what all these differences are, and try the new tastes and smell the new smells and look at the new textures. And that's when our curiosity is sparked. And so that
Mm.
was what we were trying to create with this project as well, is that the entire thing looks like an international marketplace.
Yeah.
It's like, as I said, it's housed in shipping containers, and we're serving street food from all over the world. And we even have ethically sourced, crafts and goods. So it kind of has that marketplace feel. And the idea is to kind of spark that curiosity and inspiration that you're open to when you're traveling. Yeah, so
Hmm.
that you can, as we said at the beginning, create more appreciation. Because what we appreciate, we tend to want to protect. So it
There
starts
you
there.
go.
That's the twofold aspect of it. It's like, create the appreciation. Well, first create the curiosity. And then through the curiosity, we come to maybe appreciate some things. And then once we're appreciating it, it's like, oh, we want to learn how to protect it. Well, here's the solutions.
Yeah, I love how all of this kind of ties back to that. Something as simple as that can have a greater impact on these seemingly insurmountable challenges that we all face. Because I know that's I know my brain goes that direction sometimes too, but then I coach myself, like and again, this is why we go to the men's group, is to like literally just be able to say out loud, like, oh man, I'm just feeling heavy today. Like I feel like there's really nothing that I can do to like create any kind of positive impact on the world and blah. You know what I mean? Like just get it out and then have other people pick you up and see you and hear you, and it just allows you to shift your perspective. And I think you're speaking to a piece of that with this project. So I'm glad we got a chance to talk about that. And I'll make sure I link it up. Make sure to send me over whatever you can that you want me to put out so that people can kind of see what we're talking about here as well. I've got one last little bit here on this interview that I want to run through with you. I call it the power of one lightning round. So
Okay.
don't mistake this for like, you don't have to give one word answers or anything like that. It's just intentionally meant to be like a series of 7 questions that I always wrap up every interview with. So you ready to roll?
Sure.
All right. So first question I got for you is, who is one person or mentor that's been the most influential in your life all time? So you can go right back to childhood if you want.
Well, the one person that's been the most influential. Ah, I mean, like just anybody, male or female.
Anybody.
I would say my mother.
Mm.
Yeah, my mother is she's a sailor gypsy, just an empowered woman, and I've gained a lot from having the experience of being her son. Yeah, she's been a powerful influence in my life. Here I am sailing and traveling in her footsteps.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. A lot of people go back to their parents for sure, and if they don't, it's usually because of some childhood trauma story, but then somebody else came in and became the father or mother figure for them. And that's a lot of times where people default to,
Yeah,
as far
yeah.
as most impactful.
I mean, it's important to have role models, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who is one person or mentor that you would say is the most influential in your life in this moment right now?
In this moment.
Yeah, like in your reality right now. So not necessarily looking back to, early childhood, but just like the people you spend the most time with right now.
Yeah, I mean, like I've got some really good kind of brothers that I've fallen in with here in New Zealand. Um, some self-actuated, accountable, authentic brothers, and one of them is named Lachlan. He's a good friend of mine here in New Zealand, and I've taken a lot from that friendship and that example of like another brother kind of making his way in the world, but doing it with heart and centered integrity.
Mm,
Yeah. So not
yeah.
anybody your listeners would know, but yeah, this guy Lachlan, who I met in New Zealand, this amazing character. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's cool. It's important, I think that, and the reason I ask that question is I get all varying answers on that one, right? But a lot of times it always centers back to like the people that you spend the most time with, or the people that you admire, or people that just give off a good vibe and an energy, right? And it's just a reminder for other people to, if you don't have your tribe, go find it. Don't sit and expect it to come to you. Like go find it. It's an
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. And there's just a lot of inspiration in the world. There's a lot of inspiring people out there for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. What is one philanthropic cause that means the most to you, and why?
Well, there's one program that has just come online recently that I actually find really interesting because I think it has a lot of potential, and it's called the Dollar Donation Club.
Mm,
And it's basically it's based on the premise of like crowdsourcing philanthropy. If
mm,
that makes sense. So
mm-hmm.
the idea is that if there are a billion people give $1, then you've got $1 billion that
Right.
you can donate. And there's plenty of people on the planet that we could do this with. So and I see, unfortunately, a lot of billionaires, and I'm not the only one that sees this. A lot of billionaires that like have this money and they're just like not really doing great things with it.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, well, why are we waiting for them? Let's all be
Mm,
our own billionaire philanthropist. So
mm,
that's a really interesting project that's come online because then they go through and they just vet and vote on different philanthropic projects, mostly relating to protecting the environment, because that's
Yeah.
the biggest pressing concern for us right now. And yeah, and then they vote towards putting and funding these projects, putting money into them. So that's a good one.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely link that up and go check it out too. I know I had a conversation with a friend the other day where we were talking about, what it would take to eradicate world hunger, and the number is like, it's a massive number, but in context of like what some big corporations or individual, 0.001 percenters, it could be solved literally overnight, So
Yeah.
why isn't
Yeah.
it happening? But I love that angle though, where it's like, well, why wait for somebody else to do it when the masses can actually collectively do this without really significantly impacting their own way of life, right? Like,
Right.
what's a
I
dollar?
mean, we
What's a
know that
dollar?
crowdsourcing works, right? We've seen
Mm-hmm.
it. We've seen it in action, and we've seen it work for funding other projects. So why not fund the philanthropy that's saving our planet? We can do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and it seems to me it's kind of like what this whole conversation is about, which is really about the story of how this impacts you, right? So like tying it to the fact that a crowd funded you donate a dollar and we can actually do X, Y, and Z. If it has a really compelling story attached to it, that's what makes people take action, right? It's the same when I put my marketing hat on, my sales hat on. It's the same thing. Everything people buy into ideas or enroll into ideas based on the stories and how
The
it
story,
like
yeah,
really relates to them.
yeah. We are in the middle of like the most epic story in human history. As I was saying
Right.
earlier, this generation, the people that are alive on the planet right now, are going to decide the fate of this species for thousands of years. This
Yeah.
generation, that's the story. Like we are in it, and we have the choice to like make this an epic tale, of redemption and heart and courage to like make the right choices. That's the
Hmm.
story that we're in, and we can all play our
Yeah.
part in it. That's what's so great about that program, is that we can all be a part of that. We can be a part of it in our families and in our communities, and we can get involved in voting for the broader policies. And I don't say voting in the ballot booth, but also voting with your money, voting with how you choose to participate in this experiment of capitalism. Where are you
Yeah.
putting it? Where are you choosing to express, this is what I am supporting by what I'm putting my money into?
I love it. A couple more questions. What is one thing you are most grateful for right now?
I mean, I'm grateful for my health. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're looking at lots of people that are struggling with health, and we're looking at a world that has been shut down because of problems associated with human health. Yeah, so that's definitely what I'm in this moment the most grateful for health, for friends, the support of friends and family around me, for being in a privileged state of being. I feel like if I'm not struggling to survive, if I'm not like looking for where my next meal is coming from,
Yeah,
then like I'm in a state of privilege, and so I'm
totally.
constantly grateful for that. I'm grateful that I get to be one of the minority populations on the planet that can think about these things, that can think about, how
Yeah.
can we do better? How can we come together to help save the planet? How can we protect what there is left? Because a large portion of the planet can't be thinking about that. They're just worried about their own
Hmm.
survival, and bless them.
Yeah.
That's the only capacity that they have. And so, yeah, I'm grateful to not be in that part of the world population, that I'm in the privileged part that can actually do something about this and think about our future and hold that responsibility. I'm not just struggling to
Yeah.
survive. Yeah. So that's what I'm grateful for.
Yeah, it's a good one. Perception, right? And just it's like going back to just Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like if you're in a state where you're literally just trying to survive day to day, then planet be damned. I need to eat, And
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
and
up
I
to
think
it's up to the populations, in these, whether you want to call them Western or developed countries. Like we're the ones that have to decide for the rest of the planet, because everybody else is just struggling.
mhm,
Not everybody, but a large portion of the
a
countries
big
and
chunk.
populations out there
Yeah.
are just struggling. You can't expect them to be worried about you know the environment when they're just trying to survive. So
Yeah.
it's up to us in the privileged countries to make these choices and to carry that weight for the rest of the world.
Yeah. Good answer. What is one thing you are most curious about right now and looking to explore more about?
Well, I mean, I think, alluding to our conversations, the thing that I'm most curious about is the capacity of the human race to answer the call. Yeah, that's what I'm inspired to see. Because there's a lot of reasons to give up. There's a lot of reasons to look out at the world and say, "Wow, there's just too much happening. Like, what could I do?" You know,
Yeah.
um, that's there, and that's easy. That's the easy way to just kind of like, well, I'm just gonna worry about myself and worry about having fun and enjoying the years that I have, because the rest of it's just it's just
Mm,
going to hell in a handbasket.
yeah.
So being able to look around and see people that move beyond that and say, you know what, there's hope here. There's not only is there hope, but there's like a good chance that we can really like be the heroes of the story. And I want to be a part of
Mm,
that, and
yeah.
seeing that courage and that inspiration. And if you look for it, it's everywhere. It's happening in every community, in every country across the planet. There's people that are taking part in being the heroes of this story,
Yeah.
and that's really what's the most interesting to me right now is following that and being inspired by that and watching that unfold.
Yeah, you just said something at the end of that that's kind of struck with me, which is like what we seek out, we find, like what you're looking for, you will see. And I think it very much pertains to this, like if you're looking for somebody to align with you on how much you hate your government, you will find those people, and
Yeah,
they will
yeah,
validate your position and you will stay in a state of hate and anger and it will kill you. Or you can stay in a state of happiness and possibility and wanting to create impact and find those people and attract those people, right? It's these conversations, I feel, is my small contribution is to bring people like you on to say these things out loud so that people can think differently. Like just if that first piece can snap, we can
yeah.
create
I
some
mean,
impact.
when we're talking about our own personal development and we are having a problem, we talk about like recognize the problem, but then work into the solutions. Like
Hmm.
how whatever the modality might be, because it's different for everybody, and we all latch on to different ways of finding these solutions. But like we need to look at that from a societal standpoint as well. How are we going to solve these problems? Are we going to just like identify them and say, wow, there's just like all these problems, and just like dwell on it? Just like
Mm.
that would be unhealthy to be in our own personal growth. You don't find problems and then just dwell on it, because then you just get depressed and like you don't find the solutions. So it's the same thing with what we're looking at in the world. It's like when we recognize the problems, we don't want to gaslight it and say it's all great and we're not going to look at it. We want to look at it. We want to look at the horrors of it, and then say, okay, let's not get stuck here. Let's now like recognize that that's happening, and then move into whatever the solutions are.
Hmm.
And I really think that that's. I mean, if you notice what the way that these documentaries and these awarenesses that have unfolded about what's happening in our world is, they started out very doom and gloom. They're very much like
Yeah.
there's all these terrible things happening, and then they just kind of like left that with you, and you're just like, wow, what can I do about this? This is just there's just like so much destruction in the world. I have no way of affecting this. And now, if you go and you watch these documentaries, these information, this packets of information that are coming out into our awareness, it's about offering what's happening, saying this is real and this is devastating, but here are all the solutions, and here's the inspiration, and hopefully it'll provide some courage to do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question for you, Cyrus, which is what is one thing that scares you right now that you need to face with bravery?
Oh, well, I mean, like the fear of inaction and lethargy.
Mm,
To be paralyzed by the fear that we're currently on a trajectory that, if we keep on going, is not a very good trajectory. And that means like on a global scale, but also on a personal scale. Like I want to be able to go out and experience like a healthy, happy planet. I don't want to be going out into an apocalyptic planet as what I experience as a human being. I want to be able to enjoy my years on this planet and feel like there's hope and there's like happiness and joy and the celebration of diversity and enjoyment of all those spaces, and it's not a struggle of fear and separation. So yeah, that's what I fear the most is falling into that trap of just being in a fear state, falling into
Mm.
separation and being afraid of everything. I think that I appreciate that we can rise above all that, that we can unify and we can appreciate each other and celebrate all the differences that we have in our world.
Yeah. Love it. Those last three questions where I ask about gratefulness and curiosity and bravery, like it's another theme of what I'm creating here, which is, I know my kids are going to watch this in 10, 15, 20 years. And those are three words that I want them to live by, and I think us having these conversations and then also revisiting them too. So you and I will definitely have to do a follow up on this, because every single person that I asked the last question to around bravery, just the act of like saying it out loud brings awareness to it of what they know they need to go and do. And then naturally, like, let's talk again in 6 months and let's see, like, you've got a big vision of what this future looks like and the impact that you can create. And I'd love to be a conduit to help you accomplish that and create accountability for everybody that's listening to this and all of that kind of stuff to create change. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's a lot,
likewise.
but it's
Let's do it
fun. I
together.
love these conversations, man. Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm totally I'm just fascinated. I'm curious right now about these conversations. So like the questions I'm asking you are coming partially from a place of like, I've seen a handful of things that have made me get that fear in me, like you said, where you're just like, oh my God, what have
Yeah.
we been doing? Like, I've been a part of this generation since 1976 that's got us to here. Are you kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
we are terrible people, like this is what goes through a person's head. But then you just flip it and you're like, but wait a second, I'm still alive. We're not irreversible in all of these things that are happening. There's something that can be done. So it's just literally like a switch flip for me. And then naturally you go, but how? So for me, it's these questions to people like you that have been sailing around the world for 20 years that have seen these things. It opens up a new level for me. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you having this conversation with me as well and sharing, kind of your position and your thoughts on all of this stuff with all your experience.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's good to talk about. We need to be having these conversations and be talking about the solutions and finding and pushing that courageous inspiration to handle these things, because we have the power to do it. We have the technology, and we've got the means, and we've got the resources, and we've got the willpower. We just have to want to do it, and
Mm,
I think once are appreciating more of that aspect, more of our own power of being able to handle it and do it well, then I think that it'll just come. There's actually one before we sign off, just
yep.
for you and for your viewers. Project Drawdown is a really good space to go to if you're looking for solutions. They're the
Mm,
the world standard, basically, like the biggest organization for offering solutions to climate change and other environmental issues. Yeah, and it's
cool.
a really inspirational place to check out. It's by the Buckminster Fuller Institute in the United States. Project Drawdown.
Nice. Excellent. I'll make sure to link it up. And on that note, too, where can people connect with you, find out more about what you got going on? What's the best place?
Well, they can go to www.thestreet.nz or NZ,
Okay.
and that's the website that we have. It's still under construction, but we have
Yeah.
a website there, and you can sign up for our newsletter. You can learn more about the street as we develop it and as we get launched.
Excellent. I'll make sure to link that up. NZ, NZ. It's so funny hearing that, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I've lived in the States before. I went to school there. Of course, I'm Canadian, so that's most polarizing in these two countries.
What is it in Canada? Is it Z or Z?
I honestly, I constantly forget, to be honest. I think it's
Right.
Zed. I think
Yeah.
it's Zed. But like, because I've lived in both places, I got made fun of in one place for saying it one way and then the other way. And then I just literally forgot
Yeah.
what each,
I had to get
country
used to it.
actually said.
I'm used to
Yeah.
saying Z, and I've been here for the last 2 years, and now I've gotten used to the Z. So yeah.
There you go. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for doing this. I've started to hear the little creaking on the boat there, which is awesome. Like it's
Yeah.
really going to add some flavor to this interview. You were my first interview with somebody on a boat, I have to say.
Oh, okay, great. Nice. Well, we'll have to do it again sometime.
Absolutely. We will definitely do that. Thanks so much, Cyrus.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Trevor Turnbull Show. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please consider subscribing on my YouTube channel and on your favorite podcast platform and leave me a review. I'd love to hear from you. Now, until next time, remember, today is a beautiful day of opportunity. Trust that you're exactly where you're supposed to be right now. So be grateful, be curious, and be brave.